Hey guys, Pete here. This is going to be a Westworld Season 2, Episode 3 recap. I'm not exactly sure what to call it. Since I can't do it till later in the week, I'm going to dial back the scene-by-scene breakdown because I'm going to assume by this time you've already watched one of those, if not several of those. And I suppose that I'll dig a little deeper into theories and what people are thinking about since I have that little bit of time to look through all that stuff before I make the video. This episode was called Virtu e Fortuna, which is Italian. From what I understand, this is a Machiavellian concept, and a really simple explanation sort of comes down to virtue is representative of things that you have control over, like not virtue in the sense of morality, but in the sense of things that you do well, that are your strengths. And fortune is things you can't control, things that happen regardless of preparation, the unknown, luck, if you will. On first watch, it was not my favorite episode. I do have to say, though, that after I watched it again, it was much more satisfying. And the third time I watched it, I got a lot more interested in the story of what's going on and all those questions that are still fun to think about when it comes to host versus humans. So we start off with a cold open for the second week in a row. We get this new park, which is called the Raj. There was a theory going around that that's what one of the parks was, and we found out that was the case for sure. I read quite a bit about people saying that this is crazy that they would have a park like this. I don't think it's that crazy, though, when you think about the situation. At least what I could say is that I could see why they chose to do something like this and why that would appeal to a certain subset of people. Anyways, we meet a new character who we're going to call Grace. That's what she's been referred to on IMDb. That could be planted there. There's also some ARG stuff where a QA person named Grace exists. And I'm not going to go completely down that rabbit hole at this moment, but when I first watched it, I didn't really care much. I liked it. I liked this twist. We weren't expecting this. We were expecting Shogun World. So I liked that it was something to think about, something new. I didn't know whether the characters were going to be recurring. So I didn't know if, we were really supposed to have any feelings about them whatsoever. By the end of it, we realized that Grace probably is very important. The popular theory is that she is the Man in Black's daughter. There's no real great evidence for this, but the other popular theory is that it's another trick on the timeline, trick us out like how young William was last year, and that this is actually a young Teresa, and I don't really follow that at all. I don't think that's the case. I've been wrong before when it comes to Westworld theories, though, so that's out there. I think the William one makes a little more sense, but I did read in an article written by James Hibbard, who has probably seen the whole season already. He said that all he could say is that she is important and she will return. As far as the timeline, I think that this is during the robot uprising. So it's back in time a little bit, but not like way back to when Teresa was young. So I think we can leave it at that. Grace is an important character. We'll find out more about her as things go on. And the Raj is a place, and we can find out that hosts went off script in other parks as well as in Westworld, at least in this one case where a human was killed. There's a transition scene here that is after Carl Strand enters the park. When he first enters the park, we see Bernard there with him, and they run into Charlotte. She delivers a really conspicuous, "Oh, Bernard, you made it out. I didn't think you had it in you," kind of line. And that set up red flags to me each and every time I watch this. Obviously, there's something going on with Bernard. There's a few good theories, or at least they're fleshed out well. I don't know if I subscribe to either as being confirmed. Obviously not, or else I would be saying that it's been figured out. But I think this really kind of points out, again, that there's something going on with Bernard in that first scene where we see him. The scar, we see it sometimes, we don't see it. So there's likely more than one Bernard. And, we also saw that in the trailer. There's a shot of Charlotte with several Bernards. So they're not active or whatever, but still. The theories here are that when we see Bernard in the beginning of the season at the beach, that's not Bernard in there at all. I think the most popular theory is that it's Teddy inside Bernard's body because we see Teddy under the water and because of the Rickroll video and a couple other things. There's some pretty good bits of information that could back this up. The other part that sort of goes along with this is that everyone knows Bernard's a host and they're bringing him back online. Like we see him in the beginning where we think it's Arnold. We think that Arnold's talking to Dolores in the past. It could be the other way around. It could be Dolores talking to Bernard after she brings him back online. And the other part of that is that they need to find something out through Bernard, so they keep running him through this loop where the beach sequence happens. Those things could both turn out to be true. It could really be anybody inside Bernard's body if we're going to get the idea that they can switch the eggs around inside their heads. So I'm not fully endorsing any of them yet, but I think it's cool to think about what might be going on. And they definitely laid that out early on, that he's an unreliable narrator based on this brain fluid that's leaking out of his host juice that's coming out of his ear. And it could basically be anybody. So that's cool. I like that. He could be Arnold. He could be just regular old Bernard. He could be Super Bernard. He could be Teddy. He could be Dolores, for that matter. There's lots of ways that could go. They might know he's a host. They might not know he's a host. Who knows? I can't wait to find out more about it. But we do see how Abernathy ends up getting away from Charlotte the first time. She mentions to Bernard that he keeps slipping away from us. So even though she ends up with him at the end of this episode, we know that he slips away again. We get to see Bernard adjust Rebus to use him as a pawn to get Abernathy free. That was kind of cool, and it called back to the first episode when we see Rebus jump in front of the woman who's about to be shot. But at the end of the day, Charlotte ditches Bernard. If she thinks he's human, that's kind of cold. She's only looking out for herself, but I think we already knew that about this character. At the same time, Bernard gets caught, and that takes him and Abernathy over to Fort Foregone Hope. Now, I have been critical of Dolores' scene so far in that I just don't feel that connected to what she's doing. She's sort of out for revenge, and I didn't expect that would be how her story would play out at this point. On first watch, I was sort of like, who cares? Whenever she had her sad scene with Abernathy, because she's just been programmed that that's his father. She's had other fathers, so on and so forth. I thought to myself, why does Craddock care that she sold out his men when she's already resurrected men in front of him? Like, they're not dead, not in the real sense of it anyways. But on second watch, I found it a lot more compelling in that she may have been programmed to love this guy. That may be, where that comes from, but it doesn't invalidate that connection. And, it makes me think about human relationships and how, you can feel connected to someone, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's real. So why couldn't the opposite be true when we're talking about hosts? And I think this is further kind of fleshed out whenever Sizemore is saying to Maeve and Hector that they can't actually be in love. So I think there's some interesting stuff going on here. And I think that the showrunners haven't lost their minds. I don't think they have anyways, and they haven't forgotten how to make a compelling story, but they are fully aware of the hive mind and how it goes after TV shows in this era, like the Reddit stuff and everything else. I mean, a big knock on the show last season was that everybody figured out all the twists before they were revealed. And even though I didn't think that took away from it, I have hope that it is going to play out where all of this makes sense. Like, I'm fully not into what's going on with Dolores, but I'm not ready to chuck out the whole show because I think it will all pay off. I could be wrong, but I don't think I'm going to be, and we're just going to have to wait and see. But yeah, I wasn't a big fan of the Delos charge on... I mean, it just seems like, yeah, I know that we know that they're incompetent, the security forces, and that the hosts are somewhat superior in a lot of ways. But some of it just seems like inexplicably bad planning. And I don't know if we're supposed to suspend disbelief here and, hey, there was an explosion. I don't know. It wasn't my favorite part. But then again, I've talked to other people and they really liked that there was some action and some stuff blowing up. So I guess, to each his own. The other big problem I had here was that they didn't secure the back at all. Like Charlotte and her people could just walk in. Of course, they didn't all walk out. But, it was a little bit surprising to me that she was able to get a hold of Abernathy so easily. But before all that goes down, we do see Bernard poking around inside Abernathy's brain. He sees that there's a really large encrypted file there, and he does see a one-time use key, which I won't go into it. I did research about this, and the reason I'm not going to go into it too deeply is because we didn't see him activate anything. So, there's theories that he actually did. He downloaded the info. He's carrying the info around. He knows what the key is. That's why they're running him through the loop. And so on and so forth. But we don't really know because Bernard is in a diminished capacity. We see this as he tries to walk away later, and he's unreliable. So we can't guarantee that any of that stuff happened, but it is something to keep in the back of our mind. He may have access to the information or he may know what it is. But, the whole idea of him putting it in his head and that's why he's glitching out, I don't think that's the case. The network's down. He had to port in. He took the pad out of Abernathy's arm when the QA guys come in. So unless he put it into the pad and then plugged the pad into himself and this big elaborate thing, I think that the information that they want is still in Abernathy. I was talking about this with someone earlier today, and I think that the information is actually probably what they've been collecting, not just intellectual property on how the hosts work and things like that. Last season, that was what I thought it was, but now that we know more, that they have this little underground bunker where they're collecting all this information, there's more to what that data probably is than just how to make a host. At Foregone Hope, we also see Teddy go against Dolores' wishes. She tells him to kill Craddock after the battle. He lets Craddock go. Of course, in the teaser for next episode, we see that frees up Craddock to go out and team up with the Man in Black. I'd like to think that it's not just a situation where they're like, well, we need to keep this character alive, that there's some higher purpose to what went down between Teddy and Dolores there. Like, she's testing him. And even though he didn't pass the test, that it's not exactly as straightforward as it all looks. Because earlier in the episode, she says to him, "You're all I have left." And that would be kind of a short-lived situation if he's all of a sudden completely off her list of trustable entities. One of my favorite parts of the entire episode did happen in this, though, and that was zombie Clementine. I don't know what the effect that they use, how they do it, but when she's dragging people around and the way she moves, I really enjoy that. I don't know. It hasn't gotten old yet. I've watched it 3 times now, and I still like watching her glide around dragging people. And she does knock Bernard out and drag him away. That is where he ends up for the time being. Dolores says that she's got to go to Sweetwater with Teddy, and everyone else, I guess, would be out looking for Abernathy. So things end up with Maeve. The Ghost Nation approach her, Hector and Sizemore, and this has really opened the door to a lot of speculation about what the Ghost Nation actually is. How are they different from the other hosts? Maeve here can't control him. He doesn't do what she wants like other hosts have done in the past. That makes them seem different. Hector seems unwilling to shoot them, which is strange. But they are willing to let them go if they'll give them Lee Sizemore, who is the only human that's there. So they end up in an elevator. They go underground. They hook back up with Armistice and Felix and Sylvester. Armistice has a great entrance. Lee has a little bit of a breakdown because he doesn't get how it's possible that Maeve and Hector could choose to be in love with each other. We find out that Hector is actually an idealized version of Lee himself, which is interesting since they're going off together, and that Lee isn't very capable and Hector obviously is. But yeah, I mean, the whole Ghost Nation thing is really kind of a big deal at this point. Well, it's a big deal because the last time we saw Stubbs in season 1, we thought he was being attacked by the Ghost Nation, but then in season 2, we see him pop up like nothing ever happened. We haven't been filled in on what happened there, which makes it mysterious. So we have the Ghost Nation, who I thought were an interesting thing briefly in the first season when they started talking about, and this was in Maeve's story as well, about how they're had a sort of idea of who their gods were, you know, the guys in the costumes underneath. And they sort of just brushed right over that. A lot of the theories that are floating around now are based off of, well, maybe Ford had set these guys up to protect humans in the park. They were like an internal security layer. That's why they want Sizemore. Then there's Elsie, who hasn't shown up. We know she's coming back this season. Perhaps she was taken and she reprogrammed them to be that way. And then there's they could just be something else entirely. They could have reached sentience on their own or some level of it, and they've just made their own decisions and developed in a different way. I kind of like that the best. It's the most fun to speculate about, but Elsie is coming back, and we do need to find out what happened to her, what happened to Stubbs. That's a big question mark in the timeline of the story, and it may be related to that. A lot was made about how we've never seen them hurt a human. When they find Grace, they seem to be there to receive her, not to attack her. She is with them, so we can hopefully find out what they're about and more about what she's about. But yeah, I didn't think much about the exchange between Sizemore and Maeve the first time I watched it, and Hector, until I watched again and I thought more about Dolores and Abernathy. And I mean, that is kind of the whole thing with Maeve right now, is that she knows intellectually that host is not her daughter, but she doesn't care. From what we've seen from Dolores, Dolores knows intellectually. She knows everything. She remembers everything that's ever happened to her. And she knows that Abernathy's not really her father, but she doesn't care. So there's some irrationality around love or around strong feelings of connection that hosts have that's very similar to what we develop ourselves as humans. And of course, the episode ends up with a cliffhanger, which kind of sucks, but I think it's sort of like, at this point, there's so many storylines that there's just going to have to be some of this kind of stuff. Like, we didn't get any Man in Black here. The pacing is just the way it is, you know what I mean? You can't, it's sort of like Game of Thrones. There's so many characters doing so many things, you can't touch on all of them in one episode. So they're going to spread out, and then as they come back together, we'll be able to tie all this stuff up in a nice little bow before the end of the season. Sizemore doesn't really know where he's going or where he's at, I think is what they're saying. Anyways, they end up getting charged by a samurai in Shogun World. We see that Delos can control the weather, at least somewhat. And we also saw this in the trailer with the rain in Lawrence's little part of the world there. There's more here. The Grace character, there's, like I said, there's several different theories. Her notebook there, we saw that double hexagon. We've seen that in other places. We've seen that on the screen whenever Charlotte logs in to try to get a rescue operation. We saw that in this episode again whenever Bernard is poking around in Abernathy's brain. To me, I haven't really heard a lot of people talk about this yet, but to me, that kind of ties whatever Charlotte's doing together with Grace. However, it could be that Grace is just an employee and that she's doing the same kind of stuff that Charlotte was doing when she came to the park. I mean, nobody knew who she was when she first showed up. The other side of that is that Grace could be an industrial spy, and she's there to try to get a hold of the data, and therefore she'll be after Abernathy as well. But, it's too early to tell. It's really too early to tell exactly how that's going to fit in, but it's a lot of stuff to think about, and that's all right as far as I'm concerned. I did do a trailer breakdown for the next episode, and we see that it's going to probably be around the Man in Black, him hooking up with Major Craddock, and we'll see more of Bernard and Charlotte in the underground bunker. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about these theories. I mean, obviously, a lot of them have gotten popular. Bernard equals Teddy is probably the most accepted, I think, at this moment. Some other interesting ones is that this narrative that Ford put together for William is going to actually end with him coming across the younger version of himself, a host version of himself, and Ford basically offering him a chance to do it again. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, that seems cool. I mean, I'd like to see more Jimmy Simpson and stuff like that. But, you know, one of the things that we have to remember about Westworld, and one of the things that really comforts me when I'm afraid that it might derail, is that this isn't a meandering story that they're writing as they go along. They know where the end is. Of course, it could probably change and whatever, but, you know, they took time after they shot the pilot to write out an outline of how all the seasons will go and what the ending of the story is. So we shouldn't run into one of those lost situations where, you know, there's all this stuff that seems important, but it turns out not to be. If that's the case, which I think it is, then all we have to really worry about is that they can land the plane. You know what I mean? They got quality actors. They got HBO throwing a ton of money at this. And the story so far is compelling to me. So at the same time, anything we see in this season is part of a bigger picture. So, you know, it's hard to say what that bigger picture is. So I'd like to hear what you guys think. Where do you see things going from here? I can't commit to doing these every week. This week it turned out pretty good. I had some extra time. I'm going to try to. I wanted to thank you guys for the comments on the trailer breakdown and the encouragement to do it. I didn't get to respond to a lot of it because I just haven't been on there, but it's, you know, it was nice to hear that you guys wanted to see this and it made it worthwhile. So thanks for that. And please like this video. Please subscribe to my channel and thanks for watching. I'll talk to you soon.